Hello everyone, my name is Charles Godfrey and I'm director of the Oxford Martin School. Looking around the audience, I see many of you are old friends here, but those of you who don't know the Oxford Martin School, we're part of the university and we have the brief to do interdisciplinary things, bringing together people from different parts of the university to address some of the major challenges of the coming century. And we're here because of the generosity of James Martin, and the Martin family, and Jim's portrait is downstairs as you go out. It's my enormous pleasure this afternoon to introduce Shenggen Fan, who is both one of the global thinkers in food and development, and is also an old friend, so it's a particular personal pleasure to welcome Shenggen here. Shenggen is by training an economist from China and has been Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute since 2005. IFPRI is part of the CG system, the organization that includes IFPRI and CIMMYT and many other organizations that were behind the Green Revolution. And Shenggen's organization is particularly concerned with the policy around food. Shenggen does so many other things, it'd be impossible to list them all, but I'll mention his lead role in SUN, Scaling Up Nutrition, an international movement to try and focus on malnutrition. He advises many countries, including his own China and Vietnam, among others. And then to pick out one award, which has a lovely sound to it, in 2014, the World Food Programme awarded Shenggen the Hunger Hero Award, which I think is hugely deserved and is lovely. And Shenggen is going to be talking this afternoon on innovating food systems to respond to rapid global changes. Thank you, Shenggen.
Well, thank you, Charles, for such a great introduction. I think I won the Hunger Hero Award because probably I solved my own hunger problem. Anyway, so I'm so happy to see lots of old friends here, and Jim, Doug, and Cheryl. Nice to see you here. And probably lots of students. I remember you present several RAs over here working for Cheryl and Doug and so on. So I'm here to share some of the sort of latest thinking we have from IFPRI, from CGIR, and from the global community. So today we are facing tremendous challenges. So some of the challenges at the global level has fundamental impact or profound impact on our global food system. And I think the innovations will be key. Innovations not just in technology, innovation in policy, in institutions, in financing are equally important. I see the John over here. So this chart is not surprising to you or not new to you. Yes, for the last two decades, we have achieved tremendously in reducing the number of hungry people in the world. So basically by 2015, we achieved MDG goal number 1B, cutting the number of hungry people by half. So we almost achieved that goal. But just last year in 2016, the number of hungry people began to rise, partly because of the conflicts, wars, civil wars related to climate change and so on. So we had 35 more hungry people in 2016, 2017. So in total, we have 850 million hungry people in the world. And most of these poor people, hungry people, obviously are in South Asia and in Africa. But there's another dimension called hunger, particularly in terms of undernutrition, child stunting. So right now, at this moment, about 155 million children suffer from stunting. So they are just too short compared to their age. So I was one of them. I caught up in a university when I had good food. And most of these stunted children are actually in Asia, in South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and to some extent in Africa. Yes, we have seen tremendous progress. I remember over the last 1.5 decade, the number was reduced by almost 100 million. So 100 million of stunted children were reduced. So that's tremendous progress. And there are other so-called burdens of malnutrition. So I would call it the 3 burdens. Number 1 burden is undernourishment. You simply do not have enough to eat. The second burden is hidden hunger, so lack of micronutrients, vitamin A, zinc, iron, and so on. And right now we have 2 billion people who are suffering from that. And that chart on the right shows you the lack of iron, anemia, of productive women in many parts of the world. And you will see in South Asia, in Africa, it's red, which means high percentage of productive women do not have enough iron in their diet, in their body. And when the women are anemic, particularly productive age women, then their children will suffer. So lower birth weight, stunted children, and beyond. Now, the third burden of malnutrition is overweight, obesity. Simply we eat too much, or we eat the wrong stuff. And we have 2.1 billion people suffering from that. So remember 3 numbers. 815 million people suffer from, let's say, undernourishment, or lack of enough dietary calorie. 2 billion people suffer from lack of micronutrients, like hidden hunger. And 2.1 billion suffer from overweight and obesity. And every year, more than 3 million people die because of overweight, obesity. And because of the diets, we just eat the wrong stuff, not balanced diet, too much of that, too little of that. So we have so-called 3 highs in our blood, 3 highs. High blood pressure, high blood glucose or blood sugar, and a high blood cholesterol level. So three highs. And many young generation, particularly in China, in Brazil, the 3 highs. So probably 1/3 of the young generation have that. And probably half of the population have either form of the highs. And as you know, all these so-called diet-related habits cause NCDs, heart diseases, diabetes. And in my own country, China, the diabetes is 12% to 12% of the population. And excuse me, even more, 3 times, 4 times of that population is so-called pre-diabetes. So it's not diabetes yet. It's somewhere between normal and diabetes, borderline. So I'm one of them, by the way. So that's why I try to control my diet to make sure that I'm not going to become diabetic. So just at that level. But rapid changes. The world is changing very rapidly. And some of these changes are opportunities. Some of the changes are threats. So deglobalization is one of the things I worry a lot. And that trend has impact on our food system. The urbanization, the rapid urbanization, food safety issues, the environmental issues, the conflicts, and also some of the opportunities like technologies. So I will come to this is one by one. Deglobalization, Brexit, well, we know that, and the US inaction, pull out the TPP, even NAFTA now, and probably even more. Now the migration and the refugee crisis. The global commitment to Paris Agreement. I think US was the first one. I'm not sure whether other countries will follow, but definitely the commitment has been weakened in that process. Just for your information, every year we produce a global food policy report. This year, for 2018, our focus is on deglobalization. So deglobalization involves restrictions of movement of goods, that's trade, right? Restrictions of people, that's migration. Restriction of money movement, that's basic investment, foreign direct investment. And also restriction of knowledge movement, the control of internet or anti-science, anti-climate science or anti-biological science. So all these are part of the deglobalization movement. And I very worried that it will affect our global food system. The rapid urbanization and rising middle income population, well, this is not necessarily bad. We wanted to see people moving to middle income, from $10 to $100 a day. So that's the World Bank definition. If your income is from $10 to $100 a day, you're middle income. So right now, 2/3 of middle income population is in this part of the world, in Europe, in North America. By 2030, 2/3, probably even 70% of the middle income population will be part of my world. That's Asia, China, India, Southeast Asia. 70%, just in a matter of probably 15 years, 20 years. What does that mean to our global food system? We have already seen the massive, movement of the animal proteins or even the animal feed. It's from US, from Brazil to China. Last year it was 90 million metric tons, 90 million metric tons of soybean imported to China. So it's a massive shift of the nutrients from Amazon region to somewhere in big cities like China, Shanghai, or Nanjing, where I came from. So yes, it's a great opportunity. We are getting richer. We are middle income. But what does that mean to our food system? Do you think these nutrients will go back to Brazil, to US? I don't know. China shifts all this electronics to other parts of the world. The main time imports are not food. So that sort of imbalance probably will continue in the next 10 or 20 years. And the food is a big part of that. The changing diets. So as part of the rising income, as part of the urbanization, our diets have changed rapidly. We eat more meat. Look at these two charts. You can see the two things from the left side. The one is in urban China, the meat consumption has increased dramatically. Just since 1995, the urban consumption of meat increased by more than 50%, 60% per person. In rural areas, it also increased, but not that big. As part of the urbanization, if all the Chinese rural population move to cities, consume the same amount of meat as the urban population, how much meat do we have to produce? How much feed do we need? And look at Ethiopia. Today Ethiopia, actually as part of the income increase, they increased the consumption of staple crops. Well, that's the first stage. When you are poor, when your income begins to increase, the first thing is you do is to eat more rice, more wheat, more maize, or more injera tapped in Ethiopia. But as their income continue to increase, they will also eat meat. Could you imagine if Ethiopians also catch up with China in terms of meat consumption? Nigeria, DRC, how are we going to feed our world? Food safety concerns. I travel quite a bit to different countries, particularly South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. So when I have dialogue with ministers of agriculture in Thailand, Vietnam, China, their actually top concern is food safety, not the food self-sufficiency, not the rice production anymore, food safety. I remember the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Fan, he made a small sort of statement saying that, food safety has always been a problem in our society. It's just the media, now suddenly found something to report. Just that sentence almost costed his job. Because the middle income population demand better, safe food. Safe food. They are willing to pay more, but the food must be safe. See here, even in US, food safety issues cost $14, $15 billion a year. And some years ago, in China, just one meat or sort of contaminated, tainted meat incident cost $1 billion in China. Avian influenza, all these sort of zoonotic diseases cost billions of dollars, not just to consumers, actually to smallholder producers. And so particularly how foodborne diseases affect children. 1/3 of the death of the children under 5 is because of the foodborne diseases. This new thing called antimicrobial resistance, because we overuse antibiotics, not just the human consumption. I think equally important is animal. Not only in Asia, China, Vietnam, but also in Africa. But the nature of the antibiotic resistance is very different. For China, for Vietnam, it's the feed additives. They add antibiotics to feed. And the animal, when the animal eats antibiotics, they don't get sick. But they develop the diseases develop resistance. Bacteria develop resistance. For China, I remember the Chinese total antibiotic consumption probably is half of the world. And in China, half of the antibiotic is consumed by animals, not by human beings, because of feed additives. When the animals consume antibiotics, this antibiotic will be in the meat. So basically, humans also consume antibiotics indirectly. So Vietnam, China. For Africa, it's a different story. For Africa, yeah, animals get sick, but because of fake antibiotics, or maybe inadequate doses, then the bacteria develop the resistance. So the World Bank estimates that if we don't control the so-called AMR, it will cost us $1 trillion by 2050. So not just our health, not just our environment, but also costly in terms of economy. And I know there is an initiative, you might know that, between Britain and China. There is an initiative to tackle this problem. But I thought the approach is wrong. The collaboration, called the British, John, I don't know whether you know, you were the chief scientist. British and Chinese are working together to tackle that problem. To do what? To develop even more effective antibiotics, not to control the virus. So I thought this is a wrong approach, and not money on that. But if we can set the right priority to really control the use, optimize the use, make sure that we can control the AMR instead of developing another super antibiotics. If you have one super antibiotics, then you have to have another one. So what is the end? I think there's no end. Well, this chart is not new to you, but the agriculture is pushing planetary boundaries. We have so many boundaries. Genetic diversity, we are already in red zone, so high risk, and nitrogen use, phosphorus use. All the three, you will see, all the three actually are related to agriculture, to food. You overuse nitrogen, we overuse phosphorus, or we misuse phosphorus. We didn't protect genetic diversity of our crops, of our animals, of our different species. So they are already in red zone. There's some of the areas like climate change, land system change, they are in yellow zone. So they are moving towards the risk zone. So if we don't do something in 10 years, 20 years, we'll be in red zone. When we are in red zone, it will not be easy to go back, to recover. If you want to do that, it will be more costly, much more costly to do that. Climate change. I know many of you have worked on this issue. I know the energy sector, the transportation sector have done a great job in terms of mitigation, reduce the carbon emission. But agriculture, food lag behind. By 2050, just the emission from our food system from agriculture, nothing else, let's say energy or transport, carbon neutral, don't increase anything. Just food and agriculture will emit 20 gigaton a year. It's already 2-degree world. So what does that mean? So if we don't do anything on agriculture and food, definitely there will be 2-degree world. And so this is a big job for us, for the people who are working on food and agriculture. Persistent conflicts and crisis. I think about 2 months ago, right? Exactly the same room, we had a debate, we had a discussion here on conflicts, particularly in Syria, right? How we're going to rebuild, how we're going to make sure that we can learn something from Syria, from Iraq. Unfortunately, if you look at the number of conflicts, it's increasing over time. Just the last probably 10 years, the number of conflicts have increased. We have seen that in the Middle East, in Africa. And then you will see a strong correlation between conflicts and hunger and malnutrition. It is in the conflict regions, conflict zones, where the hunger and malnutrition have actually increased despite the global decline. I think last year, or 2006, 2007, why hunger increased? I think a major reason is because of conflicts. Yemen, South Sudan, Northern Nigeria, Somalia. So these are the countries are struggling with conflicts. And these are the countries who have seen the increased hunger and malnutrition level. Well, some good news, emerging technologies. And well, automation. We had our board meeting here last May. I think many of you came. I think Charles definitely came. Before the board meeting, we had some field trip. We have seen some vertical farms, or so-called hydroponic farm, tomato farms, highly automated, highly mechanized, obviously very capital intensive. Well, this is here in UK. So I think maybe 20-30% of your tomato consumed is from all these highly automated factories. I don't call them farms anymore, factories. In US, investment from the so-called virtual capital investment in agriculture and food is increasing dramatically. You might know that in Minneapolis, somebody invested huge, large, how do you call that, the tank to produce fish all year round. You know, Minnesota is very cold, right? How do you do it? So they just build an artificial. Everything is automated, controlled environment to produce fish. And what does that mean? I mean, it's a great potential, absolutely. But what does that mean to our smallholder farmers? It also raise some questions. So all the challenges are here. If we don't do something, I think these challenges will become even greater. Innovations are key. I mean, as a researcher, as the head of research organizations, I think we talk about innovations. So yes, certain technologies will continue to enhance yield. We have seen some of the technologies from CGIAR, for example, remote sensing technology. Now, remote sensing is not just from the air to see what's going on the ground. So now we actually can see something below the ground using the radar, particularly for roots crops. So you can see how the roots crops have grown, how do they shape, when do they grow, then we can optimize a certain production process. So by doing that, this is innovation from CIATA, the Center for Tropical Agriculture, based in Colombia, particularly cassava. So by optimize certain production process, and also, I don't know, maybe harvesting. For example, the cassava. Cassava, if you can observe cassava grow on the ground, maybe after a certain stage, the rows will not be able to increase. If you continue to let them in the field, you're wasting your time. You're wasting nutrients. Probably it's better to harvest. All these sort of things can happen. So just by doing that, the cassava yield could be enhanced by 20%, 30%, or even more, 50%. The precision agriculture, well, this is nothing new. You know, the Monsanto basically has been transformed itself from a GMO company to a big data company, precision agriculture. So the big tractor in US, in Australia, that can link to satellite, to sensors on the ground. But here I'm not talking about these big tractors. The precision agriculture in Africa. So using microsensors to detect the soil moisture, to microdose the fertilizer use, water use. By doing that, the production will be increased by 30%. The input use will be reduced. and improved climate-resilient varieties. For example, drought-tolerant maize in Africa. CIMMYT has been working very hard on that, so the yield can be enhanced by 30%, 40%. And you must have look at the impact of that sort of maize. And now there is a very dangerous worm in Africa. I don't know whether you have heard about it, called four army worms. And I met with the new USAID administrator in Davos, Mark Green. So he warned everybody, if we don't do something, that four army worms can cost us more than $10 billion for African farmers, particularly Malawi, Uganda, and beyond. Technology can help. So, I mean, some of the technology you might have heard of BT cotton. The BT cotton, you insert certain bacteria into that crop. When the insects eat that crop stems, the insects will die because the insect cannot digest that. I think the four army worms, this is one way to tackle that. Well, obviously, there are many, many technologies. The new rice for Africa, Narica, I mean, it's a cross between the Asian rice and the African rice. And a good condition, again, the yield can be increased by 30%, 40%. In some ideal situation, can double the yield. I think what you have seen these technologies. Some technologies increase the yield. Some technologies reduce the, let's say, environmental footprints. But there's another technology that can enhance the nutrition, biofortification. So through breeding, you could actually add micronutrients, the one I just mentioned, zinc, iron, vitamin A, into crops. Rice, wheat, maize, cassava, sorghum, millet. IFPRI is hosting that program for the last 10 or 15 years. Howdy Boys and the World Food Prize laureate 2 years ago introduced that program. So now we have 30 million smallholder farmers in Africa, in Asia, that produce biofortified foods. And 30 million consumers are already consuming that. So same rice, same wheat, same maize, same cassava, but the contents of micronutrients of the food have increased. And obviously their body's content of micronutrients have increased. And I was in Davos just about 2 weeks ago during the World Economic Forum. And many of colleagues, I'm not sure from your school, definitely from UK, we worked together to look at some of the game-changer or game-changing technologies that can fundamentally change our food system. Alternative proteins. Yes, you can eat insects, we know that. If we broaden our, let's say, appetizer to insects, actually 20% of our proteins can come from insects. But that's not it. Just before the new year, my family went to a restaurant in Washington, Tyson's Corner, called Founding Farmers. And I saw a hamburger called Impossible Burger. I said, what is this? It is a hamburger made of plant-based proteins. I said, I'm going to try. My daughter, my wife, they don't want to try. They want to try real meat. And after trying, I cannot tell the difference. The real hamburger and the impossible meat. Now I checked the website. The CEO is Pat Brown, based in San Francisco. I looked at the website. It said, oh, that hamburger can reduce the carbon emission to like 20% of the normal level. Reduce the water use by, this is a really big game changer. Then in Davos, I met with Pat Brown, and Pat Brown brought his chef into Davos, served Impossible Burgers for many people. It's tremendous. That burger used to cost us $2,000 a piece. Today it's $12 if you go to Founding Farmers, $12. I think it will come down even further. So you will be able to afford that hamburger at maybe half or 1/3 of the real meat. That will reduce carbon emission, reduce water use. I think it's a really game changer. We'll see. Well, food sensing technology, and food safety is a big issue. Again, I've seen some young researchers, young business, even women business people there, innovate certain technology through camera to take the photo image of the food. Then you will be able to tell whether that food is fresh, whether that food is safe to eat. And obviously some postdoctors in US, I think maybe either Cornell or Minnesota, she developed a tester tube. You just insert that into meat. It will tell you whether that meat is good enough to eat. All this can really help to reduce the food waste. You don't need to throw them away. And to reduce the food safety incidences. Gene editing, absolutely gene editing. And that's what genes are in crops. I'm not the expert. Somebody told me that lots of genes, good genes, are in that. Whether it's good or bad, you just add it to increase the potential of that genes. And I don't have the other chart I'll show you. Even gene sequencing. Gene sequencing cost used to be like $10,000 or whatever. Today, if you go to China, called the Beijing Genome, they can analyze all your genes with $500. Diseases or your genetics, whatever. So I just had a lunch with one of my friends, Ron Wang, the FAO ADG. He's going back to China as a vice president of that company. So tremendous progress, tremendous opportunity for us, for CGIR. We can send all our crops, animals, to test different functions of the genes. But the innovation can also come from farmers. So it's not just the scientists, not just the business, not just the CGIR, the farmers. And I grew up in southeast part of China, in close to Shanghai. And I have seen tremendous opportunities for farmers to innovate. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The planting basins to conserve water and improve food supply. You don't need to do much. It's very simple. You just dig a hole, or it's called create a basins to plant some crops, tomatoes, or even tree crops. The yield can, in some areas, the yield can triple. That's an example in Kenya. On average, 30%, 40%, 50%. And evergreen farming. I mean, this is the technology from IFPRI, the tree agroforestry research center. So you interplant, intercrop fruits, fruit trees, and other, it's a staple crops together to use air, soil, water efficiently to complement each other. So yes, we have all these technologies. We have all these different options. How does this technology affect our society? Hunger, malnutrition, food production, food supply, prices. We need some tools, models. So models at IFPRI West, we have a couple of models. The impact model, so the global, that's trade model, very much focused on agriculture. So I think many agricultural products, food products, prices, trade, supply and demand. I hope there are some economies over here. So basically you use a price to solve the supply and demand. Then you can analyze different options, scenarios. I think IFPRI is working with your school, right? Martin School, to look at a couple of issues, climate change, animal production. I think the potential is great. But in the meantime, we also have so-called a CGE model, the general equilibrium model. It's not just agriculture. Sometimes you have to place agriculture, food in a broader economic context, link with non-agriculture sector, non-food sector. So we have a model called a mirage model. It's a dream model that can really link with the non-agriculture sector. And obviously, we also have lots of country-based model, economy-wide. So for a country, you develop a model that can, let's say, model the whole economy. And that gives a very good tool for the decision makers in that country to target their investment, prioritize their investment, analyze potential impact of different policies, technologies, and so on. So about 3 or 4 years ago, IFPRI analyzed the impact of different technologies. No-till, nitrogen use efficiency, drought tolerant varieties. I think it's about 11 technologies. So the potential impact on poverty, hunger, malnutrition. Right now, I think that model is asked by CGIR to do the same thing, right? Particularly on breeding side. The breeding, I think you are involved in that. So that tool, it's a tool. It needs data. It needs parameters. But it gives you a nice framework where you can link it to different sectors to solve it. And it's conceptually correct. I think, John, that model also provided support to your report, I remember it, Sherman Robinson and others. So we continue to work to improve that model. The policy innovations is equally important. Right? It's a policy research, right? Policy. Sometimes we ignore the policy, innovation. Now, I came from China. The Chinese reform, agriculture reform, in 1978, started with experiments, started with tests. I thought it's part of a policy innovation to give farmers rights, give farmers land to produce. It's a market work. What's the problem right now? It's the subsidies. $500 billion are used to subsidize the fertilizer, water, electricity, output price. And these subsidies produce rice, wheat, and maize because, for self-sufficiency purpose, China, India, and many emerging economies. So they do not produce some of the more nutritious foods like vegetables, fruits, milk, dairy products. They also cause huge environmental issues. Because of subsidies or because of free water in China and India, underground water goes down and down, deeper and deeper. It also emits lots of carbon dioxide, methane into the air. So, see, these subsidies do not produce nutritious, healthy food, do not actually help farmers' income, and do not produce economic efficiency, and actually they contribute negatively to our environment. So can we reform it? I mean, there are lots of students here. Maybe assignment could be, Charles' assignment could be, do some experiments, convert all the subsidies to income support. Well, if you're a farmer, instead of giving you subsidized fertilizers, water, free water, you buy all this at a market price, but they give you money. Well, the Europeans has done that, right? Then let's look at the impact on the environment, on smallholder income. And even more importantly, maybe use that money to do research, to promote more nutritious, healthy foods, and to promote a more sustainable food production. So, can we do some experiment on that? We know that different foods have different environmental footprints. Now, this chart is produced by the World Resources Institute. It's so-called a killer chart. They do beautiful communication work, a killer chart. So this one is a killer chart. But look at the beef, look at the pork. Beef is probably 7 times higher water use, 7 times, maybe even more, carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emission. So pork, I don't have the goat meat over here. Vegetables, fruits, you can see, these charts, they have different carbon footprints. Maybe in the future, when we buy the food from the supermarket, I hope the neighbors should not only just cover the nutrition facts, they should also have some environmental footprints over there. So what do? Can we tax unhealthy, unnutritious food? Unsustainable food? And use the money to support behavior change, to support production of vegetables and fruits. Again, some of the modernists, I think, Charles, you were part of that. I think you and Marcos and IFPRI, right? So we work together to look at the potential impact of taxing carbons and use the money to promote fruits, vegetables production. production. So guess what? The prices of the unhealthy food or unsustainable food will increase, the consumption will go down. I think most importantly, 100,000 people, death will be avoided. I think probably your impact is underestimated, my sense. If you do it, if you have more accurate data, I think the impact will be much greater. I know this is very controversial. I like that chart so much. I present it in many places. The beef industry hates me. The Brazilians don't like me. But I think the science is science. Data is data. If you think they have already changed the farming practice in Brazil to bring down the carbon emission of livestock sector, well, let us know. Let us know your carbon emissions. Let us know your water footprints so we can resimulate the impact. Financing, where do we get the money? The private sector wants to invest in agriculture and food, but they face risks. They also do not have enough knowledge, information. They don't know how to evaluate. So blended finance is the way to go. So the first lunch I had this year in 2018 was with the CEO of the IFC, International Financial Corporation, based in Washington. To my surprise, every year they sell $50 billion debt. So they're actually working in the debt market, buy and sell. The biggest market actually here is in London. They don't do it through New York. They buy and sell debt through London financial market over here. But IFC is not totally private. It's a financial company. It has a public mandate to help poor, hungry, development, and so on. So they begin to innovate some sort of green fund, right? Green fund, they've already had that. They want to do more. Food, nutrition. So if the CEO said, well, if you guys can give us some idea how we can really make sure that, okay, we can provide some sort of funds to de-risk or to provide incentive for the private sector for achieving some social, environmental objectives, we'll be very happy to do that. But they have never heard about CGIAR, by the way. First time they heard about CGIAR. So instead of green funds, we could propose food funds, nutrition funds, or whatever funds. So the IFC can provide de-risking, leverage. The carbon markets, it's already working in China. And I hope the US will begin to look at that issue too. Closing gender gap. Cheryl is sitting here, so that's why I wanted to present that here. It's an institutional issue. Land rights, their access to assets, their knowledge, information, their political voices is so critical. And the CGI IFPRI have done some study. What is it? Women's Empowerment Index in agriculture, right? That index has been used by many. In fact, I think some of the UK institution, Oxford, is it Oxford, right? Was one of the collaborators. Oxford, IFPRI, USID, initiated that index. So it's what I learned so much from them. They said, why women is less productive? It's not because they're not smart. It's because the lack of access to assets, to political voices, to services. So if you can narrow that gap, 100 million people will be moved off hunger and poverty. So the impact is huge, tremendous. Now, encouraging inclusive value chains. I'm still trying to struggle. What is the food system? What is the value chain? To me, probably the system has so many chains together that work together. So value chains. The value chain must benefit smallholders, must benefit youth, must benefit women. And there are a couple of innovations. One example I kept using is India Dairy Development Board. So at a national level, it's a semi-government agency, we're partly supported by government. But at state level, there's a board, and district level, there's a board, down to the village. So that system, It's called a board, but to me it's more like a cooperative. 13 million small dairy producers are part of that network. So if they are part of that network, they have access to credit, access to knowledge, access to market. So because of that, India is the largest dairy producer, not US. India is the largest dairy producer. And they are all smallholder based. 2 cows, 3 cows, not 100 or 200, even 1,000 cows. Smallholder based dairy producers that produce the largest amount of milk dairy products in the world. And more importantly, is the nutrition of their children. So the children's nutrition status have improved because of the access to milk. The milk price has come down, and they also have access. Milk is available to them. And 6 million of these smallholders actually are women-led households, dairy producers. So that sort of value chain is inclusive. Definitely youth, smallholders, women have benefited from that, children have benefited from that. So the question is how we're going to do scale up that sort of innovations. Governance mechanisms. So I know, the people don't like scorecard or index and so on. This, just about 10 days ago in Davos, Bill Gates and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia co-hosted a breakfast meeting. And I was fortunate enough invited by them to talk about so-called African agricultural transformation scorecards. What does that mean? That means around 16 indicators. We give them color, green, yellow, red. I think, I don't know how many, I forgot, maybe 27, 28 African countries. And Bill Gates asked me to explain why we needed this card, how we have done it. IFPRI supported that with the AGRA, with the African Union Commission. So it's a simple tool. It's a simple scorecard. You can always debate about reliability, accuracy of the data. But the reality is you have a card there. They can compare, they can analyze. I remember the president of Rwanda was there, was also in the breakfast meeting. He's the incoming chair of the African Union. He said, hey, what's wrong with Rwanda? They got yellow in agriculture spending. That's because Rwanda spends 7.5% of their national expenditures on agriculture. But CAADP's target is 10%, so they got a yellow card. And child stunting, it's red. I think it's 39%. He said, why is that? He said, I'm going to talk to the Minister of Finance about the expenditure on agriculture and the Minister of Health on child stunting. It's exactly the purpose. You need the global and national leaders to compare, to review why certain areas lag behind. So that scorecard was launched in the African Union Summit on January 31st. So sometimes accountability does not need to go very far. Just good data, good scorecard, good peer review mechanisms will help them to compare. And I think most important, I may also make that statement to Bill Gates and others, and with some of the African leaders. We should also make all these scorecards available to every citizen in that world. So the citizen will push their government to change why our child stunting is too high, is so high. Why only we spend, let's say, 0.5% of agricultural and research expenditures as a part of agriculture GDP. Then obviously that's agriculture, right? What about the food system? At IFPRI, we have worked with a couple of other agencies, World Economic Forum, World Bank, Rubber Bank, Eat Forum, to introduce a global food system index. So I announced, I don't know how many indicators, to really look at how their food system has functioned, has performed, in terms of nutrition, in terms of health, in terms of climate resilience, in terms of health, in terms of inclusiveness, sustainability. Create a chart to show the leaders how their food system has performed. Give them some pressure. Then consider scientific platform for food system. Yeah. You know, the climate change has a platform, right? IPCC. Can we have one for food? Can we have one for agriculture? I think if we have that, we can bring the data, evidence, research-based evidence, like a climate change, to make sure that our global leaders, national leaders, or even citizens are empowered with the knowledge, information, with the data. So we can really push our global food system to be sustainable, producing nutritious, healthy food, and climate resilient. So everybody can benefit from that. Okay, with that, thank you very much.
So I'd like to thank Shenggen for a really fascinating and stimulating talk. We have a question session now, and I need to remind you that we are being recorded, so perhaps not too many risque jokes in the questions. And there are people with microphones who are circulating around. Who would like to go first? Question there, Jim.
Thanks, Shenggen. Thank you, Shenggen. Very, very stimulating. To what extent are we sitting on a food systems time bomb? And to what extent do you think some of the innovations you were talking about will just sort of automatically help to tackle some of the issues that you've raised? So, are we in a situation where there really needs to be some fundamental shifting and changing gears to deal with these issues? Or will we just sort of muddle our way through it and it'll be all okay?
One by one? Okay. I'm afraid it is a time bomb. We cannot afford not doing anything. Climate change, yes, it's a bomb, 20 years, 30 years. I think that the safety issues is also a bomb. Could you imagine this AMR continues? I mean, I listed my part of the world, China and Vietnam. It's not acceptable. I think the hunger, malnutrition, and the conflict, right? You debate about it. It's a cycle. If the people are hungry, malnourished, they will go against you. And if they go against you, wars, civil wars, again, lead to malnutrition. So that sort of cycle will continue. If we don't break that cycle, by solving hunger and malnutrition, to me, to break that cycle is to solve hunger and malnutrition of this population. Otherwise, you will continue to see that. Somalia, northern Nigeria, just these two countries, clearly. So I see some urgency to do things different than before. So not just, we've muddled through for the last 40 years, 50 years, the Green Revolution, right? We produce more wheat, more maize, more rice. We fed so many people. We were very proud. But I think if we still continue to do what we have done, I'm afraid that bomb, sooner or later, will explode.
Thank you. Marco. I just wait for the microphone.
Yeah, related question. Could you talk a bit more about why the hunger rates or the number of hungry people went up in over the last year or so?
Yeah. Well, as I said, conflicts. The 4 countries, I think the UN has already declared these 4 countries as famine countries. We have, for many years, we didn't see a famine. The last famine we saw probably somewhere in Ethiopia. Joachim von Braun and others studied on that. But then suddenly, in 2015, 2016, 4 countries were declared as famine countries. Obviously, the definition of famine, you can check, the percentage of people, how many months they do not have access to food. So that's very much related. The other thing is inequality. Inequality has increased. This is not just here in US, or in Europe and the US. inequality actually increased the most rapid in some of the emerging economies, China, India, and probably Africa. So basically we see the economic recovery, economy continue to grow pretty fast. But the people left behind have not benefited much. And I'm afraid in the future, because of automation, robots, how are we going to cover the bottom part of the population? Universal social protection, food, access to food? I don't know. So some of the technology, like vertical farming, that could be a killer of jobs. I have seen that in Singapore, here in UK, in US, or even this impossible food, where impossible food probably will need lots of animal producers out of job. So we need to bring agriculture into the society and bring the whole society into the food. So that's why, so last year, despite the increased food production, despite the strong economic growth, but the hungry people have not benefited from that growth, from that process.
Thank you. Andy.
Thanks very much for a great talk, and I really liked your emphasis on subsistence farmers. I wanted to ask a specific question about them, because one of the issues that's often not discussed is the fact that under climate change, it's going to be more and more difficult for subsistence farmers to maintain their labour productivity. So we're doing some work suggesting that if we go towards a 3-degree future, for example, that many millions of people will be exposed to levels of heat stress which will make it extremely difficult to do any physical labour for quite substantial parts of the year. So I think one of the issues has to be, as well as improved agricultural technologies, also how can we sustain the health and the well-being of subsistence farmers in terms of heat stress? And my question really is whether you see a prospect for more low-cost, affordable mechanisation, for example, in parts of Africa and Asia, that would make it possible to sustain labour productivity even under these conditions of climate change.
Sure. Firstly, I just cannot imagine how a 2-degree or a 3-degree world affect our food production. I cannot imagine. John, maybe you can imagine. you have. Yeah, I cannot imagine. India, 2-degree world, they will not be able to survive. I'm afraid they will move to this part of the world. Now, coming back to mechanization, yes, there are lots of low-cost, very efficient, effective mechanization. China, Vietnam, hilly area, small machines, right? Small machines can really do a great deal of the work. And another point is we need to institutional innovation. You don't need to own the tractor. You don't need to own the machine. You can rent the service. In Ghana, we have seen that. In Ghana, we had actually done some experiments. Give young people a tractor, some money, and that the young person can rent a service to the whole village, or even the villages around. So it's a win-win. Win for these young people, and now he has some money income. He is very proud of it. And then the farmers are able to access very low-cost mechanization service. So we have seen that. Or even combine in US actually, it's the same thing, right? You actually basically just start to harvest from California, move to the north. I have seen that in China also, begin to use the combine, tractors, to harvest from south to north. So that's a rental service. But obviously, the institutional arrangements is required. Do they have access to finance to buy that, even a small tractor, a small combine, or credits? So that we need to work together, and then the cooperative can also help. But I think I'm more worried about 2-degree, 3-degree. I think the smallholders, even the big holders, probably will not be able to do much under that scenario. So that's why we have to work on mitigation part.
John.
Yeah, I'd echo the remarks. Great lecture. Thank you very much. There's one.
We can hear you.
I'm not a technologist here, you know. I think the issue here is one of the really worrying things that happened a couple of IPCC meetings ago was the proposal that was put up to focus on agriculture as a major component in the way that the IPCC is focused on forestry. We haven't seen a trace of that in the Paris discussions. We're highly unlikely to see it in the future. But agriculture, is the point you well made, is one of the key issues that we've got to address. And agriculture can actually help the climate change issues and move us towards something that's efficient, or it can actually grossly hinder it. Business as usual to try to meet the gap in food supply or the gap in water supply will be disastrous. It will hurry us towards not necessarily a 3 degree, but it will hurry us towards failing to meet the 2 degree. So what's your view about what the problem is? Why is the world not prepared to think about agriculture in the context of climate change and have the sort of massive financial interventions that you see in forestry?
Yeah. Well, different people have different view on that. My view is, I think we have not worked hard enough, sorry to say that, to bring the data, evidence, and communication to the whole society. I think first let's blame ourselves. I don't think we have done a good job. You know, we always try to go to South Africa. You remember Paris and a couple other places. But Paris was the first time they mentioned food security, right? I was at FAO yesterday, by the way. I had a dialogue with FAO people who is in charge of climate change. They have some leadership change. I was asking them, what are they going to do with their climate change program? But what I heard is the first time in the next round, agriculture will be there. Who knows? Well, let's hope that will be the case. In Berlin, during the Green Week, the topic was livestock. And you can see the struggle between the meat industry, livestock industry, and the researchers and the society. Livestock. You know, some of the charts are presented there. They don't like it. They deny it. They don't know. I think we need to do more. Not just to convince ourselves. I think we need to go beyond ourselves to convince the whole society. Write some op-eds in Guardians or in China Daily or Washington Post or whatever. We must continue to work on that. Because the energy part, they have done a pretty good job. And forestry, yes. And the CGIAR, I think the leadership is very critical. Not just research. Sometimes, you know, when we present, it's actually funny. When you present something they like, they say, oh, that's great stuff. But when you present something they don't like, they say, no, your data is wrong. Your methodology is wrong. They don't say your results are wrong. So I think something we need to continue to push. And I think it's beginning to change. I do think something is changing. And from China's side, I will continue to push them to make sure that they will lead on that, put agricultural food as part of the negotiation.
Thank you. Question there.
Yeah, we need some gender balance there.
Hi, my name is Catherine Grasham. I'm a researcher on the REACH project, which is a 7-year DFID-funded project to improve water security for 5 million poor people in Africa and Asia.
Right.
And IFPRI is one of our strategic partners, so it was very interesting to hear your very hopeful presentation today. My question is also about the innovative solutions for smallholder agriculture that you talked about, particularly in the African context. Some of those interventions, like biofortification, GM crops, and drip irrigation, are incredibly expensive and very difficult for smallholders to access. And in some contexts have actually shown to undermine local efforts to overhauling the local agricultural systems. And I just wondered if you had a comment about how we can work more within local agricultural systems to make sure that those interventions are working for poor people.
Right. No, absolutely. This is a great point. The couple of technologies are presented there. They're actually led by farmers. So farmers, in the 60s, 70s in China, the Chairman Mao said, you professors, go to the rural area to learn from farmers. The farmers are innovators. Well, to some extent, I think he was right. Well, a bit too much, that's true. But I do think to make sure that to learn from them, some of the innovations, for example, there are some innovations, for example, there's sort of intercropping, right? Terracing, creating basins, all these things actually can improve the yield tremendously. I was a farmer before, and then irrigation, just about 10 days ago, the World Bank hosted a water irrigation conference. There was an exhibition called Farmers-Led Irrigation Technologies. I was really encouraged by what they have done. Here and there, water conservation, and using some of the even modern things. For example, the pipes, all these pipes now, plastic pipes are available, cheap. So now they can use it. So they begin to bring some of the technologies to their farm, and the water availability. Well, given the water availability, then the water use efficiency has improved tremendously. So some of the things learned from farmers, help them to scale them up to other farmers. So,
Peter.
Peter Wheeler. Question about China. It seems that policymakers in China have recognized that there's a need to do something about the integrity and sustainability of domestic food systems, but a huge amount of China's food comes from overseas, and taking into account Belt and Road Initiative and so on. To what extent are policymakers in China looking at sustainability back in the supply chain of major imported food commodities like soy or palm oil, for example?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is China introduced an initiative called Health China 2030. Health China 2030. Basically wanted to promote health for everybody. That's a Xi Jinping's initiative. I'm so glad that food is part of that. Food. So there is a policy, or there is a target to reduce meat consumption by half. Well, I don't know. I thought it's a bit too ambitious. By half by 2030, one is I think is too ambitious. Number one. Number two is you have such great inequality of meat consumption. The chart that you have seen, urban and rural, 4 or 5 times bigger. I think for many poor rural residents, they still need to eat more meat, particularly children and women. But the urban centers, they're eating 100 kg per year. It's just so I think to reduce maybe urban residents' meat consumption by half, that would be great. Not everybody. So from reducing consumption part is a way for them to go now. Now, in terms of importing soybean and so on, and partly also it's a trade issue, political issues. Now that China and the US are running a big trade deficit, right? China kept exporting all these electronics to US. China has to import something. Tell me which one they should import. Soybean, meat, and others. So I wouldn't worry about that sort of a trade. I'm more worried about this sort of a nutrients migration. I don't know whether anybody has looked at that. The cycle of the nutrients movement around the globe. I don't. Maybe you have looked at it. I don't.
Jim's group has it.
Who did that? Yeah.
Jim Hall from the Environmental Change.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a solution. I don't know. I mean, the trade, right? We wanted to make sure that trade continues, right? Trade is good for everybody. Economically, it makes sense. Nutrition makes sense. But in terms of this nutrition balance, I have no solution.
Jim, quite briefly, and I'm afraid Jim's question is the last one. I do apologise for...
there's that lady. Why don't we just give it...
Okay, very briefly.
Can I briefly go back to Paris, where there wasn't much talk about agriculture, but the 1.5 degree goal increased the emphasis on negative emissions, and there's lots of analysis since then around the role of bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. Is there room for bioenergy amongst all of the other pressures that you've set out for us?
Well, bioenergy obviously is a very controversial topic. In 2009, food price crisis, we basically gave a biofuel a death sentence, right? US, China, India, China basically stopped biofuel production. US also introduced a policy. We want to make sure that biofuel production will not cause the poor, hungry people's food security problem. But now, after almost 10 years now, right, I think we do need to relook at that issue for a couple of reasons. The one is we have seen some technological innovations in biofuel production. And second, we also learned quite a bit whether we can use biofuel as some sort of buffer or as a policy to really smooth the price. And also to use so-called surplus grains. Again, coming back to China, 2 or 3 years ago, China had a stock of 80 million tons of maize. Maize, partly because the government subsidized farmers' production, buy this maize from farmers at a very high price, but China has had to import the maize because of WTO. Okay. So what is the result? The result is China ended with so much maize in their stock. What should they do? I think one of the solutions is convert them to biofuels. Why not? So in some special cases, biofuel can be used as a buffer to improve efficiency, to stabilize the price. This is something that economists begin to look at it. So not just 100% negative. And technology, well, I think obviously, particularly some of the food waste residues, crop residues.
I am sorry.
I think
we have run out of
time.
We have to keep. So please, but those who weren't able to ask questions just now, please join us outside and everyone else where we have a wine reception. Before thanking Shenggen, I'd like to point out that we are this term running a series in the Oxford Martin School called Health New Perspective Series. There are 3 coming up, and the next one is tomorrow, Kevin Marsh talking about prospects for new tools to control malaria. I think we've had an extraordinary talk from Shenggen this afternoon, both showing the challenges ahead, but also really encouraging, talking about how we can address them. So please join me in thanking Shenggen very much for a fascinating talk.